Since childhood, I dreamed of having a family. A loving and caring wife beside me, wonderful children, and a happily ever after. But as usual, all my dreams and plans shattered at the last moment when my wife decided she needed to take a little more time before having children. Jim Deshaies, the baseball analyst for the Chicago Cubs, always entertains me. One Saturday afternoon, I tuned in to watch my favorite Cubs take on the Cincinnati Reds on Marquee Sports. During a break at the iconic Wrigley Field, Deshaies, notable for his career with the Houston Astros, praised the adorable baby of a fan in the bleachers. Quality baby had become a bit of a trademark for him. And I wasn't alone in eagerly anticipating these moments when Deshaies spotted a young fan in the crowd. The excitement was amplified by the Cubs holding a commanding 7-2 lead in the fifth inning, with the Reds making a pitching change during the break. Just then, my wife of 6 years walked in with another beer for me and a glass of wine for herself. I shifted my attention from the quality baby to my wife. Apologies, JD, but the sight of my wife in snug short jean shorts and a fitted halter top was far more captivating. I admitted. Having quality baby time, huh? My wife teased as she glanced at the big screen. Yeah, but nothing beats quality wife time, I replied, causing her to blush as she settled beside me on the sofa. I wasn't quite restrained and started looking at her. You guys are just so easy to read, she chuckled, causing her breasts to bounce slightly as she shrugged. We sat in silence, watching as the Cubs scored 2 more runs before Vivian decided it was a good time to chat during a commercial break. Hey, why don't we head up to Chicago next weekend and kick off our quality baby-making time with some fun? Vivian suggested cheerfully. You could catch a Cubs game, and I could do some shopping or whatever. I picked up on Vivian's implication with the or whatever and shot her a sideways glance. You wouldn't want to come to the game with me. Am I contagious or something? I teased innocently. I felt her body tense against mine. Well, I thought we could each have some me time that weekend before we dive into the whole toss the birth control pill celebration and start our family, she said, flashing me her stunning smile and her bright blue eyes. She was well aware that I rarely resisted her requests, particularly when accompanied by that enchanting smile. She had been using that tactic on me for the past 8 years, 6 of which we'd spent as a married couple. However, in that moment, something felt off to me. I didn't outright reject her plan, but I also didn't enthusiastically support it. Sure, we can figure something out. Let's go to Chicago, I said without much enthusiasm. We can both take Friday off and head up there Thursday evening. I'll make the arrangements, trust me, Vivian said excitedly. It seemed like a minor blip, and I didn't think about it again until late Friday afternoon in our hotel room, when I turned on the TV to watch ESPN. We had already had lunch at a local diner and visited the Shed Aquarium. So I asked Vivian, "What's the plan for dinner?" She didn't respond immediately, and as I glanced from the television to my wife, I could have sworn I saw her shiver for a moment. "Well, for you, it's the Cubs game tonight against the St. Louis Cardinals. You're sitting right behind the Cubs dugout on the third base side. I thought you could eat and drink there," Vivian said. "For me, it's dinner followed by drinks and dancing at one of the top-rated clubs in the city. I'm not sure when I'll be back, and I suppose I shouldn't expect to be around much on Saturday either. Then on Sunday night when we return home, we can have our trash the pills ceremony and start working on starting a family." Wait. Are you serious? I'm not letting you go out alone in Chicago. For 2 nights and a day. What about us? What about our promises? I practically shouted. Vivian looked at me as if I were a slow child in need of an explanation. The latter part of that assessment was accurate. We've been discussing having children when we both turned 30 since before we got married, right, Hugh? Well, we're there now. But I've decided that since I'll be doing most of the heavy lifting, I deserve a reward for it. A reward? Seriously, I don't remember a reward clause in our wedding vows, I growled. You won't be the one carrying the child for 9 months, sacrificing your toned body, or putting your career on hold to raise the child. But I will be the one working hard to provide for our family, missing out on milestones like a first word. Doesn't that count for something?" I questioned, bordering on sounding plaintive. She brushed off my concerns as if they were inconsequential. "We've been together for 8 years, Key. Have I ever given you a reason to doubt my love or fidelity? The answer is no. So I want something for myself. A bonus. A weekend affair. Not love, just desire. For a day and a half. Then we can ditch the birth control pills, and it'll just be you and me forever." "Damn, woman, all I'm hearing is I. I snapped. "You know the saying, there's no I in team. Well, there's also no I in us. But I guess if you go through with this, there won't be an us anymore. So you're saying it'll just be you and me forever if I agree to this. But what about when we want to have another child?" "Same deal. Either way, it's not happening. In this lifetime. Do you see a lobotomy scar on my forehead?" "I wasn't seeking your approval, Key. I don't need it," she stressed. "I was informing you of what's going to happen. I'm capable of making decisions about my own body. Not my ego, babe. I'd have to address your incredible selfishness before I even thought about my ego," I replied harshly. "Maybe I should go seek out the same kind of fun as you." She looked taken aback. The superior attitude she had shown me minutes ago vanished, and suddenly she seemed uncertain. She reached for her phone and sent me my Cubs ticket for the night. "You take the car, and I'll get an Uber to where I'm going," she said, apparently realizing that I wasn't that kind of person. With a frustrated shake of my head, I grabbed my keys and phone before exiting the room without a backward glance. I could only imagine she assumed I was off to the baseball game like a dutiful, soon-to-be cuckolded partner. Instead of catching the Cubs game in person, I opted to tune in on the radio during my drive home. Pat Hughes and the team were in top form as the Cubbies clinched another victory. I didn't really have a plan other than putting distance between myself and Vivian. It's disheartening when your perception of someone veers sharply from reality. Vivian Langer was a teller at my bank when I went in to cash my first paycheck from the national transportation firm, where I'd just been hired. She had only been at the bank for a couple of weeks, having recently graduated with a degree in finance. I stood in line, observing the petite blonde with green eyes and what appeared to be a generous bust beneath her elegant blouse. She effortlessly engaged in brief conversations with customers, while efficiently handling their transactions before it was my turn at her window. "You know your employer can set up direct deposit for your paycheck, so you can avoid these lines every Friday," she said to me, flashing a bright smile. I was aware of this fact, as the company's payroll director had informed me upon my hiring. However, I'm someone who prefers the traditional approach of receiving a physical paycheck. During my summers working for my father as a kid, electronic transactions weren't an option, so I became accustomed to cashing my checks in person. I felt comfortable sticking to the old-school method. Besides, sure, but if I switched to electronic payments, I wouldn't have an excuse to visit you, Vivian, I remarked, glancing at her name placard beside her window. She blushed charmingly and responded with a radiant smile. As she nervously bit her bottom lip, I realized there might be mutual interest. For the next 2 weeks, I intentionally chose Vivian's line, even if there was a shorter wait at another teller station. Despite the other teller's invitation, I simply smiled and gestured towards Vivian, who understood my preference. While I consider myself composed and logical, I'm also confident around women. The following week, I mustered the courage to ask Vivian out on a date, and she accepted. Vivian turned out to be outgoing and intelligent, hailing from a well-off family that still supported some aspects of her lifestyle. Meeting her parents revealed that her father, a prominent attorney in our city, held a special place in his heart for his youngest and only daughter. It became evident that Vivian often got what she wanted thanks to her father's financial resources and influence. I was progressing towards greater opportunities at Bishop Enterprises, which brought satisfaction to both Vivian and her parents. As our relationship developed, John Lunger made it clear that he expected me to maintain the lifestyle his daughter had grown accustomed to. "Quincy, treat my daughter well and fulfill your responsibilities towards her and her mother, and I will welcome you as part of the family. But mistreat her, or worse, lay a hand on her, and you'll have a lifelong enemy with plenty of allies," John informed me. Yes, Quincy is indeed my given name, which is why Vivian and nearly everyone else who knows me calls me Q. It's a tradition in our family. The firstborn son in every Navarro family for 4 generations has been named Quincy. Since my uncle is still alive, my parents actually refer to me as 4. Vivian's parents are the only exception to this rule. Everyone else in the Langer family refers to me as Q, except for John and Barbara. 20 months after our initial date, Vivian and I had a grand wedding that astonished not only me but also my parents. The ceremony was officiated by a state judge, and among our guests was a United States Senator, whom Vivian affectionately refers to as Uncle Isherm. Before tying the knot, Vivian and I had agreed to postpone having children until we reached the age of 30, so we could make progress in our careers and finances. Her 30th birthday occurred 2 weeks before our weekend trip to Chicago. By the stroke of midnight, I packed 2 suitcases and loaded most of my cherished belongings into the trunk of my car. I phoned my younger brother, Bill, who agreed to let me stay hidden at his place an hour away for a few days while I sorted out my life. Both he and his wife promised to keep my whereabouts a secret, even if it meant deceiving my wife. Though she likely hadn't realized my departure from Chicago yet, preoccupied as she was with her lover, I knew she'd catch on by Sunday morning, our scheduled return home. Sleep evaded me that night as I pondered what had driven Vivian to seek comfort in another man's arms and why I had tolerated it. Perhaps, I speculated, my constant efforts to fulfill her desires had led her to perceive me as weak or submissive. She would soon discover just how mistaken she was. On Saturday morning, I attended to all the mundane financial tasks one might consider cliché, like canceling our joint credit cards and transferring half of our funds into an account solely in my name. I couldn't say whether Vivian returned to our room on Saturday only to find me gone, or if she remained out from Friday night until Sunday morning. Nonetheless, I received her first text on Sunday around 9 a.m. "Where are you? We need to check out by 11, she messaged. I shared the text with my brother, and we chuckled as we sipped our slush margaritas out on his back porch. He rose to tend to the bratwurst cooking on the grill for our brunch. Meanwhile, my wonderful sister-in-law was in the kitchen whipping up some homemade potato salad. There's truly nothing quite like the solace of family when life hits the fan. 30 minutes later, another message arrived echoing much the same sentiment, followed rapidly by a flurry of increasingly despairing voicemails. Her 10 o'clock message served as a stark reminder that she had no means to return home, even as I chauffeured us up there. The subsequent voicemail dripped with anger and threats, followed by one of desperate pleas, as she evidently struggled to prolong her stay at the hotel, thwarted by the cancellation of her 2 credit cards. "Dan, those margaritas sure hit the spot. Not a chance you'll patch things up with the foolish woman?" inquired my sister-in-law Sharon. "You two seem to have such a strong marriage, and I know you still care for her deeply. I would have done anything for her, and I understand that won't just vanish overnight, but the way she handled this situation tells me that, at best, I'm second on her list of priorities, right after herself." My brother's phone rang around 5 o'clock while the 3 of us were still on the back porch, having consumed numerous margaritas. He showed me the caller ID and raised his eyebrows, giving me the option to answer if I wished. I mouthed, "Absolutely not." He handed the phone to Sharon, who was still relatively sober compared to Bill and me. "Hi Viv, I'm picking up Bill's phone because he's too intoxicated to answer himself. Yes, we're aware of what happened. No, we don't know his current whereabouts. How could you do that to such a kind-hearted guy, Viv?" Sharon said. I could only imagine Vivian's response on the other end of the line. Sharon rolled her eyes a couple of times and grimaced once. She responded with, twice, and him twice more. Eventually, she wished Vivian luck and ended the call. "I bought you some time." "You owe me," Sharon snapped at me. "Did you realize you had an argument with her and left without letting her explain? You're truly insensitive, you know." "No, I don't care, just relaying what she said and what she's likely telling others while trying to find you," Sharon said. "Damn," I muttered. "Someone pour me another margarita." Bill obliged, once again proving why I considered him a great sibling. 8 margaritas deep, I certainly wasn't qualifying for Mensa membership anytime soon. Despite nursing a hangover on Monday morning, I made it to work on time, albeit not dressed appropriately. "Jumping the gun, aren't you?" my boss retorted sarcastically. "What's the rush, Q?" I spilled everything to him, including my half-formed plan to disappear temporarily. With luck, it would buy me some time away from my wife, or rather my father-in-law, who would take some time to track me down if he even tried. Alongside requesting a transfer, I asked my boss to change my employee name to Oliver, my middle name, and ensure no information about me was disclosed, at least within legal limits. In less than 5 minutes, my boss had arranged my next job. The Santa Fe office in New Mexico had an opening for me, and within 30 minutes, Oliver Navarro was en route to a fresh start. Officially, Quincy Navarro was no longer associated with Indiana, and technically I was no longer employed by Bishop Enterprises. A week later, I commenced my new role. The company arranged a 1-bedroom apartment for my new single life, along with a new phone and provider to ensure calls and bills were not traceable to my wife. I shared my new number with only a handful of trusted individuals back home. Among those excluded were my parents. According to my brother, Mom had expressed her disapproval of my actions and appeared to be siding with Vivian. I had no intention of dealing with her judgment or risking her passing on my number to Viv. My father became an unintended casualty in this conflict. I was aware that if I shared my contact details with him, my mother would eventually persuade him to disclose it, creating a potential problem between him and me. So I chose not to involve him. However, Bill and Sharon were reliable confidants, and I was certain my mom wouldn't obtain my number from them, despite her persistent attempts. Vivian made efforts too. Bill informed me it took her around a week to realize I had left her city. "How can we reconcile if we can't communicate, if we can't confront each other?" she asked Bill. "Maybe he doesn't want to reconcile, Viv. You really hurt him in Chicago." Bill recounted his response to her. "It was just 2 nights, Bill. It didn't mean anything," she argued. "Perhaps not to you, but to him, it meant everything," Bill replied. My career in Santa Fe carried on smoothly for the next year. Though I wasn't actively seeking it, my social life was non-existent, which suited me fine. Occasionally, I had Bill check to see if I was still legally married. Surprisingly, Viv hadn't initiated divorce proceedings. I couldn't help but wonder why. Sometimes I joined my colleagues to spend the evening after work, but it wasn't until I had lived in Santa Fe for about 18 months that I went on my first date. According to Bob Sager, she was a striking woman with dark hair and captivating eyes that radiated a certain charm. She was of mixed ancestry, half Pueblo, half Hispanic, and her strong, muscular legs seemed incredible, especially when we ended up in the same bed. We met several times, but I realized that she was looking for a long-term relationship, and I couldn't offer it to her. 2 months later, at my favorite quiet pub, I encountered Evangeline, nicknamed Angel Born, while seated at the bar. She embodied the quintessential Irish charm, with her dark red hair, freckles, and bright blue eyes. It later became apparent that she possessed the renowned Irish temper as well. Still clad in my jacket and tie from a hectic day at the office, I sat nursing a shot of Jack Daniel's Tennessee Honey when a woman's voice declared, "The one at the bar is mine, girls. You all find your own." As a group of women entered, observing their attire, I surmised that they had just finished a shift at one of the local factories, all clad in jeans and work shirts. The one approaching me had her shirt unbuttoned halfway, revealing a generous décolletage. I couldn't help but watch as she walked, her bosom bouncing. "What's on the menu tonight, Mr. Fancy Suit Guy?" she asked, flashing a wide smile, her eyes dancing. "Tennessee honey. Does that suit your fancy?" I replied. Angel and I spent the evening engaged in conversation, dancing, and imbibing. She revealed that she was enjoying a rare night out, as her 2-year-old was with a babysitter. With a hint of embarrassment, she confided that the child's father remained unknown to her. I ended up drinking a bit too much, found myself alone, and I strongly suspect I was drugged by 2 guys I was hanging out with at the party. That night taught me a few valuable lessons, the most important being that neither I nor my friends ever leave a bar alone with a man unless we arrived with him. We either all leave together, or at the very least leave in pairs, she explained. But my daughter is a blessing. She's the most precious thing in my life. She took out her phone, tapped a few times, and showed me a picture of an adorable toddler. "Do you have kids?" she asked. "I don't think parenthood is in the cards for me," I replied, launching into the story of how I ended up in Santa Fe. "Wow, that's rough. But are you still married to her? You should take care of that," she insisted. I know I should, but at the time I just wanted out quickly. Plus, there's the issue of actually communicating with her. Angel and I went on a few solo dates, and then I began including her daughter in our outings. Eleanor was initially reserved around me until I got down to her level and engaged with her. I had read about that approach somewhere, and whoever suggested it was brilliant. I quickly became her favorite adult, according to Angel. Sometimes when Angel and I were cuddled up on the couch, Eleanor would take my hand and lead me to the floor, where she would crawl into my lap like a puppy and fall asleep. It seemed to impress Angel, but I must admit, I enjoyed it too. Angel and I had a good rapport, but the topic of exclusivity never came up between us. From the outset of our relationship, she disclosed that she occasionally saw someone else. I wasn't under the illusion that Angel and I were in it for the long haul, and since she was transparent about it, I had no issue with her continuing her other involvement. As they say, assumptions can be deceiving. I simply assumed that the other person, Bobby, in Angel's life was a man. We never delved into discussing Bobby, much like I presumed she hadn't discussed me with him. However, around 3 months into our relationship, she casually mentioned going shopping for bikinis with Bobby a couple of days prior, and wait, what? I interjected. "Bobby's a woman. Spelled Bobile. Not Bobby, as in Robert." "Yeah, that's right. Haven't I mentioned that before? Bobby's a woman, a lesbian, and I'm bisexual. Are you sure we haven't discussed this?" Angel replied, avoiding eye contact and fidgeting with her hands. I shook my head silently, caught off guard. "Is that an issue for you, Oliver?" she murmured softly. I had never given it much thought before. While I've known bisexual individuals, I hadn't dated one knowingly. It took me a moment to process before realizing that the gender of the person in her other relationship made no difference in our dynamic. "Do you think I should be concerned if she's really attractive?" I inquired. I tend to find women more aesthetically pleasing than men. And if she's exceptionally beautiful, I might feel inadequate by comparison. "She is beautiful, but I don't think you need to worry too much. You both bring different qualities to the table," she reassured me with a laugh. She then mentioned casually, "Did I ever tell you I'm bisexual?" I usually disclose that early on in my dates to avoid any misunderstandings or hurt feelings. "So, does that mean you'll be curious about what we do when we're together? Are you that nosy?" I teased. "No, I never felt the need to pry into your personal life when I thought Bobby was a man, and it's no different now that I know she's a woman. We're not exclusive, and your privacy is yours, just as mine is mine. So she's pretty, huh?" I feigned seriousness, but she saw through my facade. "Who do you think Eleanor prefers?" I asked playfully. "You, obviously," she replied with a grin. In time, I became Eleanor's backup caregiver, obtaining written permission to pick her up when Angel had to work late. I even installed a child's car seat in my Mustang, ensuring her safety on our drives. When my phone rang a few months later, and the caller ID showed Bobby Clarkson's name, I didn't immediately connect the dots. Angel hadn't disclosed Bobby's last name to me, and there seemed to be no reason for her to call me. Except one. An uneasy feeling churned in my stomach as I picked up. Bobby, almost frantic, relayed the tragic news that Angel had been in a fatal car accident on her way home from work. The authorities had contacted Bobby after finding Angel's phone, where Bobby was listed multiple times in her call history. Rushing to the hospital, Bobby discovered that Angel had passed away. Amidst her grief, Bobby realized that Eleanor needed to be picked up from the babysitter, and Angel had mentioned that I was authorized to do so. We arranged to meet at Angel's apartment after I fetched Eleanor. Arriving at the apartment with the bewildered child, I found Bobby seated at the kitchen table weeping. She embraced Eleanor as tears continued to flow. We remained in that embrace for what felt like an eternity, two adults and a confused toddler clinging together. Eventually, we separated, acknowledging the need to attend to the child's needs and make arrangements. Pooling what we knew about Angel's life from our conversations with her, we realized she was an only child whose parents had passed away, with no apparent relatives in the picture. It fell upon us to care for Eleanor until we could determine the appropriate state agency to take over. Bobby managed to find some canned tuna and made sandwiches while I located a juice box and Cheerios to feed Eleanor. Amidst bouts of tears over our departed friend, Bobby and I grappled with devising a plan for Eleanor. We came to realize that legally she was under the care of the state and would likely end up in foster care, a prospect neither of us could bear. Perhaps it wasn't the most rational decision, but we believed it was in Eleanor's best interest to stay with one of us for the time being rather than be placed in the foster care system. If the state isn't aware of her, they won't intervene and send her to foster care. Eleanor can slip through and stay with us. With me, I offered. What do you know about raising a child? Bobby questioned promptly. To be honest, not much. But I was a child once, I replied. Great, that's not quite the reassurance I was hoping for, she remarked. For the next hour, we circled around the topic, attempting to devise a solid plan for Eleanor. Eventually, we reached the decision that I would relinquish my apartment, move in with Angel, and take on the primary caregiving role for the child, supplemented by daycare. Bobby offered to lend a hand frequently. Both of us were acutely aware that neither had pre- or parenting experience. Do you know that old saying, "The blonde leading the blind"? She quipped, eliciting the first laugh from me all night. Actually, it's the blind leading the blind, but your version is definitely funnier, I responded. By the way, I'm Oliver Navarro. It's a pleasure to formally meet you, Bobby, I said, extending my hand for a handshake. Instead of shaking hands, she stepped forward, enveloping me in a tearful hug. God, I'm going to miss her so much, she whispered. Me too, was all I could manage in response. The following morning, I phoned my workplace and informed my boss that I required a couple of personal days to sort things out with Eleanor. Bobby and I made the decision to have Angel's body cremated. It took a few weeks for Eleanor, Bobby, and me to establish a routine. Bobby visited the apartment almost every evening after work, and we shared cooking responsibilities. It became evident why Angel was fond of her. She possessed intelligence, humor, and a touch of sass, reminiscent of Angel. Additionally, she was tall, blonde, blue-eyed, and curvaceous. I cherished her company and felt her absence on the rare nights she didn't visit. Many nights, Bobby and I discussed our emotions regarding Angel. After 3 months, a somewhat apprehensive Bobby approached me one evening after putting Eleanor to bed. I sat at one end of the sofa in the living room, and Bobby sat next to me, crossing her legs comfortably, a feat most women can accomplish effortlessly but most men struggle with. Yes, I prompted, stretching out the word in anticipation. Oliver, what do you think about us getting a larger apartment, and me moving in with you two full-time? She proposed. It would be more economical for both of us, and we could better care for Eleanor together. I cared deeply for the child, and I suppose I want to be like her mother, in a way. And you could be like her father. I know you care for her too. We don't have to be married to raise a child. In fact, with both of us in the home, we could maintain our own social lives. And since we're friends, not romantic partners, it should reduce the likelihood of us separating like. All right, you don't have to say it. Like my wife and I. Body was undeniably beautiful, but knowing she was interested in women, I never considered making a move. That would be incredibly disrespectful. Nevertheless, I had developed strong feelings for her. We both shared a deep love for Eleanor. The plan seemed logical to me. Bound by our devotion to Eleanor, and perhaps because there was no romantic or bedtime tension between us, Bobby and I became close friends. Our trio formed a tight-knit family, especially when Eleanor started calling us Mommy and Daddy, a habit she picked up from other kids at daycare. It's remarkable how two simple words could profoundly affect us adults. The first time Eleanor called me Daddy, my heart swelled with joy. When she called Bobby Mommy, Bobby seemed overwhelmed. After tying Eleanor's shoes, Eleanor said, "Thank you, Mommy," and Bobby teared up before rushing to the bathroom. A few minutes later, Bobby emerged with tears still in her eyes, but a smile on her face. "It got to me too, Mommy," I confessed. She playfully punched me on the arm, and I smiled and nodded. With the exception of Bobby and me never engaging in typical husband and wife affection, I felt we integrated smoothly with the parents of Eleanor's schoolmates and acquaintances at social gatherings over the following years. When asked, we were honest about not being married and avoided discussions about childbirth. I was utterly surprised when Vivian, yes, that Vivian, appeared at our doorstep one Saturday morning, 4 years after I left her. "Oliver, someone's here for you," Bobby called from the living room as I sat at the kitchen table playing with blocks with Eleonora. Eleonora trailed behind me into the living room, and I couldn't tell who was more astonished, me or Vivian. Is she yours, Q?" my wife asked, her gaze fixed on Eleonora as if she had seen a ghost. I had to close my gaping mouth to respond. "Well, she's ours, actually," I replied, gesturing between Bobby and myself. "Yours? She can't be yours. We're still married." It was evident that Vivian was struggling, on the verge of crumbling to the floor. I motioned for her to take a seat on our sofa, and she complied without hesitation. "Relax, Viv. Bobby and I may not be married, but Eleanor is still our daughter," I reassured her. "Oh, well, that's somewhat reassuring. We can work with that," Vivian muttered. "What are you getting at, Vivian? Why have you come back after all this time? Aren't we divorced by now?" I questioned rapidly. To my surprise, I discovered that I was still legally married to Vivian. She hadn't initiated divorce proceedings, assuming I would return to her within the first year. Then she and her father spent nearly 2 years searching for me before she mustered the courage to approach me for reconciliation. Reconciliation? Seriously, why now? I fired back quickly. 4 years haven't been enough for me to recover from you tearing my heart out and behaving like the Wicked Witch of the West. Frankly, a lifetime wouldn't be sufficient. You know I love you. I always have and I always will," Vivian expressed. "I made a terrible mistake, but it was still a mistake. I'm sorry for what I did and sorry for trying to take advantage of your kindness. I thought if I shocked you enough, you'd be overwhelmed and have no choice but to come back to me. I also didn't believe that you would leave me just for some weekend intimacy. It was just intimacy, not love. Wasn't the prospect of having children and spending our lives together enough to outweigh a weekend of pleasure?" "You knew me better than anyone," I replied. "You knew my views on loyalty. You blatantly disregarded them. I won't tolerate that level of disrespect from anyone, not even my beloved wife." She glanced around the room, pausing momentarily on Bobby and Eleanor. "You seem to have bounced back quite well," she remarked, almost as if you hadn't missed a beat. By the way, your awful boss back home really covered for you. He kept insisting to Dad's investigators that Quincy Navarro no longer worked there, even though you had just changed offices and started using your middle name. Dad eventually obtained a court order to access Bishop's employment records, and that's when he remembered your middle name as Oliver. After that, I just needed the courage to approach you. All right, you've approached me, I responded. Even if I were the biggest idiot in history, I have a family now that I wouldn't trade for anything. I have a wonderful woman whom I adore and trust completely with my heart. We respect each other deeply. We have a beautiful daughter whom we will cherish long after she grows into a beautiful woman. We are a team. I love being part of a team. Remember, I once told you there's no I in team, no I in us. My voice had risen considerably, nearly to a shout. For the first time, Vivian appeared genuinely remorseful. Glancing briefly at Bobby and Eleanor, I walked over to my loved ones, and we embraced tightly. Everything will be all right, sweetheart, I whispered to my little girl. I understand now. Q, Vivian said softly as she looked at us. I'll file for divorce on the grounds of abandonment as soon as I return home. I don't need anything from you financially. But would it be too much to ask for your forgiveness for being so selfish? I'll do my best, Viv, but that's all I can promise. Perhaps with time, I trailed off. Vivian rose from the sofa, offered me a half-smile, and exited the apartment, and hopefully, my life. Forever. Bobby sent Eleanor upstairs to play and then guided me to the sofa, where she sat beside me with our knees touching, mirroring the look Eleanor had given moments earlier. Did you mean what you said to your wife a few minutes ago? About us being in? Us? She asked. Absolutely, I replied. I understand we don't have romantic feelings for each other, but I do love you. I trust you completely, respect you, and believe you respect me too. And I know you care for both of us as a unit. You understand. I do, she said simply, smiling brightly. Despite finally getting divorced, I didn't feel compelled to dive headfirst into dating. That wasn't me before marriage, and with a family now it was even less of a priority. While I still had some fun occasionally, finding the next Mrs. Navarro wasn't my focus. Bobby dated more frequently and had a busier social life. We stayed in constant communication about our dating lives, always prioritizing our daughter. We also had a rule against bringing dates home, except for meals. When Eleanor was around 11, Bobby and I decided it was time to tell her the truth about our family. On the night we planned to do so, both of us were nervous wrecks. We had been discussing this for nearly a year. That night, the three of us cried a lot. We shared photos of Eleanor's birth mother and explained her connection to both Bobby and me. We also had to discuss Angel's bisexuality and Bobby's lesbianism. And of course, we had to explain our decision not to relinquish Eleanor to the state, but to raise her ourselves. So we're not bound by blood, we're bound by love, Bobby concluded. I could tell Eleanor was puzzled and anxious for days as she processed what Bobby and I had told her. She was a bright and mature child, and after a few days, it seemed to click for her. You guys could have just let child services take me. Wouldn't that have been easier for you both? She asked during dinner. Doing the right thing isn't always the easy thing, I replied. I've never regretted my decision, except maybe when you threw up birthday cake all over my new suit when you were 6, and I'm sure Mom hasn't regretted it either. Bobby, tears in her eyes, nodded as she wiped her nose with a tissue. Apart from our own friends, Bobby and I had built friendships as a couple, and occasionally we went out with some of those friends. Bobby loved to dance, so we indulged in that occasionally. She was a better dancer than I was, but I worked hard to keep up. Our friends, most of whom knew we weren't a couple, often remarked on how good we looked together. Bobby occasionally danced with other friends when we went out, but she always avoided accepting invitations from unfamiliar men for obvious reasons. Despite her attractiveness, she never lacked attention from either gender. While most men respected her gentle refusals, not all did. Upon returning to our table after dancing with our friend John, a man approximately 10 years her junior took issue with her rejection. "Come on, darling, I'm better than the guy you were just dancing with or the one you're sitting with. Give me a chance," he demanded, gripping her wrist and attempting to pull her back onto the dance floor. Although I'm fairly slender at 6'2" and 180 pounds, I was still in good shape at 41. And regardless, I couldn't stand by while someone mistreated a friend. I firmly grasped the arm holding Bobby's wrist and twisted. The young man yelped out in pain and released Bobby's wrist. A grave mistake. Freed from his grip, Bobby swiftly turned toward him and delivered a well-placed knee strike. Did I mention she played college soccer? The young man collapsed to the floor, his face meeting the table on the way down. When the bar manager and the bouncer came to our table, they found a young man curled up in the fetal position, with his face drenched in red liquid. The police were summoned, and after providing our statements, we were assured that neither Bobby nor I would face any charges. I'm grateful for the assistance, but Al Clarkson's daughters were already proficient in self-defense when we began dating. No matter who we were dating at the time, that young man made a serious error tonight, remarked Bobby. I admire your dad's approach. Let's have him teach Eleanor next time he and your mom visit, I suggested. Having moved into a 5-bedroom home a couple of years prior and undertaken some renovations, we essentially had the equivalent of 2 master bedrooms with en suites. Additionally, we had a spacious family room with a built-in snack area, making our home a popular hangout spot for Eleanor and her friends. Bobby and I naturally assumed the role of surrogate parents to several teens, and truthfully, we both enjoyed it immensely. I became aware that Bobby had been seeing the same woman for approximately 2 months when she extended an invitation for her to join Eleanor and me for Saturday dinner. I deduced that this woman must hold a special place in Bobby's heart when she firmly kicked me out of the kitchen and prepared what I considered to be her best dish, veal parmigiana with spaghetti. Stephanie Ellis appeared strikingly impressive at first glance. If Bobby was rated an 8 to a 9, Stephanie easily scored a solid 9 to a 9.5. With her large brown eyes, flawless porcelain complexion, curly shoulder-length dark brown hair, and a figure reminiscent of a Sports Illustrated swimsuit model. Dad, seriously, you should let Mom play matchmaker for you. She has a talent for it, Eleanor whispered to me shortly after Stephanie arrived. Yeah, you might be onto something there, sweetheart, I replied. Stephanie not only impressed with her appearance, but also with her personality. I found her likable. Eleanor quickly grew fond of her. And Bobby? Well, Bobby was head over heels in love. It warmed my heart to witness the joy in Bobby's eyes whenever Stephanie entered the room. It stirred a hint of envy in me, reminding me of days long past, buried deep within my memory. Although it took Stephanie some time to adjust to our family dynamic and the exceptionally close bond between Bobby and me, she eventually settled in. Bobby and I shared a unique relationship as co-parents of a child we had raised since she was 2, and our connection surpassed that of mere best friends. We confided in each other about everything, from the trivial to the profound. I was taken aback when Stephanie called me a few weeks into her regular visits to ask if we could meet for lunch and requested that I keep it a secret from Bobby. I reluctantly agreed. 2 days later, I found myself seated at a restaurant when Stephanie entered, spotted me, and made her way over to my table. As she sat down, I noticed the envy on the faces of several men, and I couldn't help but quietly chuckle. Often, fantasies surpass reality. After exchanging pleasantries and placing our orders, Stephanie wasted no time delving into the main topic. She expressed her uncertainty about Bobby's relationship with me and her reluctance to become involved with a woman who might already be in a committed relationship. My response elicited a concerned look from Stephanie. Wow, if only that were the case. Women as beautiful as Bobby don't typically date guys like me, even if she weren't a lesbian. I'll take it as a sort of compliment, I remarked. But you're correct. We do share a loving relationship, one that requires some explanation. and explain I did for the next hour. We both ended up working late, but before parting ways, Stephanie had gained a much clearer understanding of our family dynamics and a newfound appreciation for rye whiskey. "All right, count me in," she declared. "I'd be honored to be part of this family." 6 months later, Bobby and Stephanie tied the knot. Since Bobby's father had passed away years earlier, I had the privilege of walking her down the aisle. 15-year-old Eleanor served as one of her bridesmaids. Eleanor bore a striking resemblance to her late biological mother, with her red hair and blue eyes. I couldn't help but feel apprehensive about being the father of a teenage girl in high school, recalling my own experiences as a teenage boy. According to Bobby and Stephanie, I didn't navigate it well. Once, Bobby vehemently objected to the idea of threatening high schoolers with physical harm for kissing his daughter. Bobby protested, recalling a particular incident when Eleanor went out on a date. "Did you see how embarrassed she was? You completely humiliated her." "I agree. You won't be meeting her dates anymore," Stephanie chimed in. "I'm certain one of us can convey your good wishes to them effectively in the future." Yes, the women insisted on an apology from me. "If I were to date women instead, would you react the same way, Dad?" Eleanor inquired. "Probably not. But then you'd have to deal with Mom and Stephanie. That wouldn't be any easier for your date," I remarked. Eleanor paused thoughtfully for a moment, her face betraying various emotions. "Wow. As much as I hate to admit it, that might be even worse," she conceded. I chuckled, feeling relieved as she walked away. Are there any words more dreaded by a man than, "We need to talk"? The answer is a resounding no. However, given my family dynamics, I was more puzzled than anxious when Bobby uttered those words one Friday evening, while Eleanor was out with friends. She led me to our formal living room, a space typically reserved for guests. A visibly nervous Stephanie was already there, and she handed me a shot glass filled with what looked like Angel's Envy rye when I entered and settled into the wingback chair she indicated. Bobby sat next to Stephanie on the couch, both holding glasses of white wine. I felt completely confused. "You've got me figured out, ladies. I sincerely apologize for any wrongdoing and promise not to repeat it." "Never," I said sincerely. The two women exchanged confused glances until Bobby figured out the situation. "Relax, Oliver. It's not what you think it is, but we'll save this apology in case of another oversight, okay?" Bobby chuckled. I need a favor," she continued hesitantly. She looked at me, then swallowed nervously, trying to speak, but without success. Stephanie finally intervened. "Is it possible? Could we borrow some of our white stuff, Oliver?" blurted Stephanie. There was an awkward silence in the room as we exchanged glances. Excuse me." I stumbled. "Oh shit. Why is it so difficult?" muttered Bobby. Oliver, Stephanie, and I want to have a baby, and we're wondering if you'd be willing to provide the material for that. Would you agree to do this for us?" It took me a few moments to fully comprehend what had just happened. Then, a wide grin spread across my face, evolving into one of the biggest smiles I've ever worn. "Oh, hell yeah," I exclaimed, igniting a joyous uproar in the room as the two women bounced up and down beside me like hyperactive fifth graders. "How did you both choose me?" "Why me?" I inquired. Once the excitement settled and we returned to our seats, they exchanged glances, both sporting broad smiles. "Picking you was a breeze compared to asking you," Stephanie remarked. "I know it might be hard to believe, but we chose you because of your intelligence, charm, respectfulness, good looks, and fitness," Bobby continued. "You're a wonderful father and a fine man. We thought it would be incredible if our child could inherit some of those admirable qualities." Oh, Dan. I've only shed tears a handful of times since becoming an adult. That day was one of them. I cried like a newborn. "You know, if you guys want, I could sell you my half of the house so you can." No, Bobby interjected. "We don't want you to leave. We want you here. We were kind of hoping you'd help us raise our baby like you, and I raised Eleanor." I think we did a pretty good job of that, don't you? I must confess, I took pride in the upbringing of our daughter, and honestly, I thoroughly enjoyed the experience. While I was a bit apprehensive about Stephanie's thoughts, it seemed she had already anticipated them. Stephanie mentioned that research suggests children thrive with both a mother and a father present in the household. Just imagine the potential for this child with two mothers, a father and a sister, all before Eleanor goes off to college, Stephanie remarked. Amidst tears and sniffles, I managed to express my gratitude. I love you all so much, you know, I said, tears streaming down my face. That evening at dinner, we disclosed our plans to Eleanor. She leaped out of her chair, embracing Body and Stephanie. Wow, I'm going to be a big sister. How amazing is that? She exclaimed with joy. 2 months later, Body, Eleanor, and I eagerly awaited Stephanie's emergence from their bedrooms and suite to confirm her pregnancy. When she appeared with tears of joy, we shared a heartfelt group hug. On a deeply personal level, my mind was overwhelmed with emotions. Just over 13 years ago, I thought I'd never experience parenthood. Now I was only months away from welcoming a second child. Indeed, family comes in diverse shapes and forms. I always admired Eleanor's intellect and growing maturity over time. She seemed to handle the unique dynamics of our family with grace, even when faced with occasional teasing from peers. Despite potential challenges like Body being a lesbian, Body and I not being married, and each of us having different last names, Eleanor rarely voiced complaints about any hardships she faced. As our family expanded to include more individuals and surnames, we opted to maintain Eleanor's original last name, as it was already on her birth certificate. Despite any outside scrutiny, Eleanor remained popular among her classmates, often bringing them to our house for gatherings, whether they were from the soccer team or band. While children tended to be more accepting, some adults weren't as understanding. Occasionally we caught wind of gossip from other adults, but it usually quieted down in our presence. Perhaps it was because few wanted to confront me, and even fewer dared to challenge Body, known for her sharp wit when defending our family. Eleanor ended up as the second highest-ranking student in her class and had to deliver a speech at graduation. Despite my knack for words, when I offered to assist her, she insisted I had already contributed enough and didn't require additional aid. Interestingly, she never rehearsed the speech in my presence, nor in front of Body and Stephanie. It seemed I would have to wait along with everyone else to hear it. On graduation day, as Body, Stephanie, and I entered the gym with Roman Alexander Ellis, who was almost a year old, we were frequently stopped by women admiring the baby, causing delays. Eleanor's speech was scheduled as the second address of the ceremony, and I couldn't help but smile when I saw the title, "There's No I in Team," printed in the program. The essence of her speech revolved around the idea that collective effort can overcome individual weaknesses, emphasizing the significance of unity and cooperation. She used our family's differences as an illustration of how 4, now 5, individuals can function as a successful unit. I'm certain I stood a little taller that afternoon. Eleanor's words moved many to tears. The entire family embarked on a trip to Arizona State University to drop off Eleanor for her freshman year. We departed Santa Fe 5 days ahead of schedule, taking part in various tourist activities, before parting ways with her. As we prepared to leave, we formed a line to give final hugs. I found myself at the end of the line, and upon reflecting later, I realized the order wasn't arbitrary. "Dad, promise me you'll make more effort to find a good partner," she whispered to me as the others made their way back to the car. "I know it wasn't a priority for you while I was at home, but now that I'm gone, Mom has a good partner. You deserve one too." "I'll do my best, but I can't guarantee," I replied in the same hushed tone. Good partners like Stephanie aren't easy to come by, you know. It seemed natural that Roman started calling me Daddy as he began to talk, and my heart swelled each time. What caught me off guard was his use of Mommy for both Body and Stephanie, yet they always knew which one he meant. I couldn't discern any difference in his pronunciation, but somehow the two women understood perfectly. 2 years after Eleanor graduated from Arizona State University, she granted me the immense honor of walking her down the aisle for her wedding. That was pretty much my sole responsibility for the event, as my daughter Bobby and Stephanie handled all the major tasks with smiles and laughter. My role mainly involved contributing financially and keeping 7-year-old Roman occupied. Although Jack Lassiter appeared to be a fine young man, I couldn't help but assertively warn him against ever harming my daughter. I assured him that I wouldn't intervene in their marriage unless Eleanor was mistreated. When he responded with understanding, albeit in a strained voice, likely due to the single-arm chokehold I had him in at the time, I didn't hesitate. Call me overprotective, but as a father, I felt compelled to emphasize the weight of his actions. Despite being in my mid-50s, I maintained good physical shape, hitting the gym 3 days a week. The wedding proceeded flawlessly, and I made it a point to relish every moment of my daughter's special day. I mingled with guests at every table, indulged in delicious food and drinks, and danced with numerous women. I stood conversing with a group of friends when a lively woman approached me. She had shoulder-length silver hair with streaks of purple, and without hesitation, she seized my right hand and led me toward the dance floor. "Do you have a height requirement for your dance partner's stud?" she quipped as she dragged me onto the floor amidst laughter from our nearby companions. "In case you're curious, I'm Aunt Deb." She introduced herself as we found our place on the dance floor. "I'm Jack's mom's closest friend. I used to change your new son-in-law's diapers occasionally back in the day. My nephew has spoken highly of you, and he warned me about your killer chokehold," she added with a grin. She flashed flawless teeth and lively blue eyes as we began to dance. I discreetly assessed her figure, noting her gymnast-like. As the music played, I discovered she moved with grace during the lively tunes. When a slower song came on, she closed the gap between us almost immediately. "It's clear you hit the gym regularly," Deb remarked. We walked into the bar hand in hand to grab a drink afterward. I had a feeling she was staking her claim, though I didn't mind. However, if she was, she'd have to pass through Bobby and Stephanie, the American equivalent of the Spanish Inquisition. First, I escorted her to our table and introduced her, pleased that my 2 closest friends gave her a brief grace period before launching into their interrogation. "I'll grab you another drink," I said with a grin as I stood up. At the bar, Jack's mother approached me, beaming as she glanced at Deb, seated with Bobby and Stephanie. "She's quite a character, but I've heard you 3 are fiercely protective of each other." "Let's see how she handles the scrutiny," Marcia Lassiter remarked. "Wait a few minutes before you return," and that's exactly what I did. Marcia briefed me on some of Deb's background. She was a year younger than me at 55, and had been married for 15 years before catching her husband cheating about a decade ago. "She gave him a swift kick where it hurts and then kicked him out," Marcia recounted. I returned to the table 5 minutes later to find the 3 women in fits of laughter. Yet for some reason, I didn't feel nearly as at ease as when I had left. 2-year-old Kayla Lassiter dashed around our spacious home alongside our 2 Labrador retrievers, her laughter echoing through the rooms, while her parents relaxed with iced tea at our kitchen table, joined by 4 of her 6 grandparents. Jack and Eleanor, who lived just 45 minutes away, frequently visited to spend time with our first grandchild. Jack's parents, Marcia and Tom, confessed to feeling a tad envious of our frequent visits with Kayla, so we extended an invitation for them to spend Christmas week with us, ensuring that all 6 grandparents and Uncle Roman could celebrate the holiday together. Marcia eagerly accepted, also relishing the opportunity to reunite with her best friend, Deb, whom she hadn't seen since Deb and I married, and moved to Santa Fe. Tom needed a bit more convincing. Privately, he confessed his discomfort around Bobby and Stephanie, having never interacted closely with lesbians before. "They're just like any other married couple, Tom," I reassured him. "All you need to know is that I trust them implicitly, just as I do with you and Marcia." "Well, I must say they're both quite attractive," he admitted. "I had this idea that lesbians were, well, not like them." I chuckled at his observation, assuring him, "Trust me, they break the stereotype. Don't overthink it, Tom. They're just women. They probably own more shoes than both of us combined." Deb was everything I could have wished for in a wife, even though I didn't realize I needed someone as energetic and dynamic as her. While I considered myself laid back, Deb was always on the move, her energy infectious. During the first spring she spent living with us, I had to prepare a garden for her. We read me, then proceeded to plant various salad vegetables while she supervised. I jokingly teased her about being part cat, as cats are renowned as nature's finest overseers. Bobby and Stephanie grew fond of her, emotionally almost as swiftly as I did. Literally. However, that didn't deter them from cautioning her before our marriage that they would fiercely protect me if she ever caused me any pain. She appeared quite shaken when she confided in me the day after their warning. "I'm pretty sure they weren't joking, babe," I remarked solemnly. "We always have each other's backs." "I know they weren't joking. I don't intend to hurt you ever. But if I do, I won't stick around. I'll disappear in a flash. It's called self-preservation," she stated. Deb persuaded Marcia and Tom that Santa Fe would be an ideal place to retire, and that's precisely what they did 8 years later. They retired a bit earlier than planned when the house next to ours became available for sale. Tom became fully enthusiastic when he discovered that Bobby was also a fan of the Premier League. Bobby supported Arsenal, while Tom's allegiance lay with Crystal Palace. It was akin to being in an English pub during a match, although things got a bit heated when their teams faced off. "Fuck off, bitch, and eat shit, old man," were not uncommon exchanges when we all gathered to watch Arsenal and Crystal Palace compete. We learned that football fans, soccer to Americans, are much more passionate than baseball fans, as Deb, Stephanie, Marcia, and I soon discovered. Jack and Eleanor refrained from bringing their 3 grandchildren along when Arsenal and Crystal Palace played. It was a delightful summer evening in Santa Fe, and I sat on my porch swing on the deck behind my house, enjoying a shot of Jameson Black Barrel Irish whiskey, reflecting on my good fortune. My eldest grandchild emerged from the back door and joined me, resting her slender frame against mine. Once again, I couldn't help but notice her striking resemblance to her late grandmother, with her dark red hair and bright blue eyes. "What's on your mind, Grando?" she inquired, using her special nickname for me. "I was just thinking about my life, about how fortunate I've been," I replied. "How so?" she asked curiously. I took a sip of whiskey, pondering how to explain to a 9-year-old. "Well, sweetheart, you know when something bad happens, but then everything ends up okay anyway. That's sort of how it's been for me." She shifted beside me, her eyes reflecting deep thought. Then her face lit up with understanding. "Yeah, like when I scraped my knee the other day and Grandma Deb gave me ice cream," she exclaimed. I smiled at Kayla, and she grinned back, satisfied that she had grasped the concept. "Exactly like that, darling. Exactly like that." Thanks to everyone who took the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing if you haven't already. Feel free to share your thoughts on the events in the comments below. Take care.